Good evening. I'd like to call the Anacortes City Council meeting for October 11th, 2021 to order. Ms. Hunt, would you take the roll?
Mr. Carter?
Here.
Mr. Young?
Here.
Mr. Walters?
Here.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Here.
Ms. Moulton? Mr. McDougall? Mr. Miller?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would you all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? All right, at this time, we'll go on to item 3 under announcements and committee reports. And the first, yes, Mr. Walters.
Mr. McDougall and Ms. Moulton both had family events and they asked that their absences be excused.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Walters, a second by Mr. Young. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. So item 3A is our COVID-19 update. And as of this week, the state of Washington reports 684,532 cases of COVID since March of 2020, 8,064 deaths throughout this pandemic. Statewide, 69% of those ages 12 and older are fully vaccinated. In Skagit County, we've had 9,884 cases of COVID. 8,000 of those were through the PCR positive lab tests, 1,903 through the antigen positive tests. We've had 101 fatalities and 575 people hospitalized. And last week alone, we had 5 people in Island Hospital with COVID. In Skagit County, 66.9% of those ages 12 and older now are fully vaccinated. The Skagit County Fairground Testing and Vaccine Site continues to provide vaccination services and testing Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday from 3 to 7 p.m. They are closed Wednesdays. Testing services are limited to people who live, work, and go to school in Skagit County and are currently symptomatic or have recent exposure. First and second dose vaccines are available to those ages 12 and older. Please speak with your medical provider prior to seeking a third dose. As always, the best way to be safe is by getting vaccinated, following the statewide mask mandates, and following the CDC recommendations. And that concludes my report on COVID tonight. The next item, yes, go ahead. Yes, Anthony.
Thank you very much. It's always good to keep up with what's happening by way of COVID-19 and the updates, so I appreciate it very much. What might be helpful going into the future, if possible, is that we would, given that the county is offering vaccine, some people may have had Madrona versus Pfizer, so at any point that they may include Madrona or one of the others, it would be great to just sort of have that as part of the report.
All right, I'll see if they'll provide that to us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else? All right, item 3B is our Port City Liaison Committee report.
Mayor Gear.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Thank you. Hey, so we had our Port City Liaison meeting on October 5th. It was virtual again, but we had a number of city staff, port staff, port commissioners, and then obviously Mr. Young and Mr. Carter and myself attended. You know, it was a good reset about talking about how COVID's affected both the port and the city, but we're keep moving forward and following guidelines, and that seems to be fairly successful. You know, their usage for their port facilities is down, but still working and having successful smaller events that follow COVID protocol. We've had a really good experience with our library usage, continuing to improve, and our museum visitors, even though it's shoulder season, is really good levels of visitors. Everyone's following the mask mandate, which was a state requirement. So we're all pretty happy. One thing is the State of the Port is going to do their presentation October 14th to the chamber. So if anyone's interested, it's always a good event to attend. We are continuing to kind of do high-level discussions at our Port City meetings, but really it's a matter of staff making sure we all get together to hammer out some of our projects that we want to get done as soon as possible. And then we had a roundtable discussion of how we can better work together in the future. I know a number of committee members on this committee have met at the port and had a really wonderful tour, understanding kind of what businesses are there and the intricacies of their wastewater program and how it interacts with the city's wastewater program. And we just kind of talked about how we would really like to do a presentation from both entities about kind of what our capital facilities plans look like in relation to the other entity, and how we can make sure we're all on the same page and getting projects moving efficiently and successfully through both entities. So I thought it was a really nice meeting. I enjoyed our time, and I got a nice tour with Commissioner Bowers and Executive Director Wara, and it was really interesting that I drive by their port all the time, and I think I know most things that are happening, and it was there's a lot more and layers to all of the things that occur at the port. So I thank them for that, and I look forward to our next year.
Thank you, Ms. Clay-McGrath. Are there any other additions to that report? All right, next item on the agenda is our Public Safety Committee report.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Miller.
Yeah, the Public Safety Committee met last week. I think it was the 5th. So from no particular order from the fire department, Chief Harris updated us on the captain's exams that are ongoing. I think all 5 lieutenants have taken that or are in the process of doing that. And if you remember the briefing to council, Chief Harris updated council on about some of the reorganization about creating a captain's position inside the fire department. As well as the other thing he said he was working on was kind of tactical SOPs, just responding to certain events. That was one of the areas that he briefed us on. Contract negotiations are ongoing. Nothing unusual reported. And then after that, we asked about the SAFER grant, but we didn't get the word until a couple days later, I think, that the SAFER grant from the Department of Homeland Security did not come through. So again, there's more details on that, but obviously lots of people applying, and we did not get the SAFER grant. On the police front, Chief updated us on 3 open positions that are still open on our commissioned police force. One due to his promotion, so leaving a captain position open, a retirement, and then one officer leaving to go to a different state, and kind of cited some of the new restrictions or the new legislation. And there's a shallow pool to draw from, so that's something we need to pay attention to. The good news is, of course, APD is still maintaining high standards. One example of those high standards is requiring an 80% passing rate on the entry exam. But one of the things the chief talked about doing was sending out recruiting teams. I think that's a great idea. And a couple other impacts of the recent legislation. They had to destroy a number of rifles because they came from military surplus. And then they're working through 12 gauge shotguns because that's more than 50 caliber. And that's something that I think our police department needs to have. So they're working through that. Also, contract negotiations are going on with the police guild, and body cameras are on track for the target date of a month before they're due. So Mr. Carter probably can fill in anything that I missed.
Sounded good to me.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Then the next item is item 3D, our Housing Affordability and Community Services Committee report.
Mayor
Mr. Walters.
We met last week, last Thursday. We talked about, first of all, a report that we'd gotten from a resident at the Burlington First Step Center, that the center there really provides no mental health or substance abuse programming, which I think all perceive as critical for some people, especially who are at that facility. So that's a little bit of a disappointment, but we also understand that they're getting started and that they're having trouble hiring just as everybody else is. So hopefully we can see some improvements there, because it's important for people, and some people have already received their notices that their 90 days in the center are up, and thus need to move out. We debriefed a little bit some of our process on the landing apartments, the family center's new building, and the $500,000 that we're talking about providing to them from the American Rescue Plan funds that is on the agenda later tonight. Councilmember Moulton had a good conversation with North Sound Behavioral Health Administration, but she wasn't able to attend the meeting, so she didn't brief us on that. So we'll look forward to hearing that at our next meeting. We spent the remainder of our time planning for our meeting this week with Representative Alicia Rule, who is one of the champions of mental health in the state legislature. We only have a few minutes with her scheduled, so we are really drilling in on what questions we can ask her about what the state is doing to improve that system, because we see that as a real failing for Anacortes as well as the rest of the state. And we'll reconvene next week with one of our regular meetings to continue the rest of our work.
Thank you. Any additions? All right, we'll move on to item 3E, our Planning Committee report.
Mayor Gear.
Yes,
I'll
Ms.
take that one
Gullion.
up. So we just had our planning committee meeting at 5 o'clock this evening. You know, we kind of did a quick overview. There was nothing of significance to discuss. There's some projects that are going to be coming before the Planning Commission and then eventually in front of us. The first one is a self-service storage facility that we have the moratorium on. That should come before us early November. It's at the Planning Commission level right now. The R4 bonus height extension, that's going to be later on in our meeting, but Planning Commission should be receiving a similar presentation this next Wednesday that we received a couple weeks ago. And then the daycare changes. The one thing that was interesting to me, at least, was we need to update our flood code. And so we are using an outside expert to kind of assess sea level rise, specifically for Fidalgo Island and the shoreline. And so that'll start October 27th at the Planning Commission level. But it's really about the sea level rise and the freeboard when it comes to construction of buildings. So that is all important things that are happening. Other than that, I think it was just a pretty brief meeting. So unless Mr. Walters has anything to add, that's all for Planning Commission or Planning Committee.
Okay, it sounds like you covered it. At this time, we'll move on to public comment. And if anyone in the audience would like to speak to the council, please raise your hand. Okay, I see Kate Clark is with us. Kate, go ahead.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
We can, yes.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to say and to commend you, Mayor Lori Gear, for signing the proclamation for recognizing and honoring Indigenous Peoples Day, which is today. It's so important that our town joins many of the other towns and cities and states in the US that are doing that. And so I see that it was signed October 4th, so it's really recent, which is really exciting that we have this development. And so I just want to ask the city council and then whoever, to urge whoever will be the future mayor of our city for next year to consider what could Indigenous Peoples Day look like next year, particularly with more time for planning? I know today it was mentioned also online in some of the Anacortes community forums that it was sort of disappointing to drive through town and just see flags of the United States. When today is really about celebrating the sovereign nations that we live amidst, particularly the Samish Indian Nation. And so I just want to ask the council and whoever our future mayor may be to really consider what next year can look like and how we can really meaningfully honor that proclamation. And then beyond that, I just want to read an element of the proclamation that is so crucial for us beyond just the day of Indigenous Peoples Day, which is the city rejects the prejudice and discrimination that stems from colonization and seeks to close the equity gap for Indigenous peoples through policies and practices that ensure greater access and opportunity for Indigenous peoples and honor our nation's Indigenous roots. So that's really powerful language that definitely has to go beyond a day for all of our practices and policies in this city. So I really want to celebrate that commitment. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments tonight. Appreciate it. All right, is there anyone else that would like to speak to the council this evening? All right, so we'll move on then from public comment and we'll move into our consent agenda, items 5A through C. What is the council's pleasure?
Mayor Gear,
Mr. Miller.
move to approve consent agenda items A through C.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Miller, a second by Mr. Young. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Now we're moving on to a public hearing, item 6A. This is a public hearing on the budget revenue sources, including a 1% property tax increase. Mr. Hoagland.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council and members of the audience. So the public hearing tonight is on the 2022 budget revenue sources, and the RCW that requires the public hearing specifically calls out a potential 1% property tax increase. And I wanted, before the mayor opens the public hearing, I just wanted to share a couple of things on the property tax levy, on the potential increase. So I have two files that I wanted to share. So the one shows what the impact to an average taxpayer in Anacortes would be, and the other shows the impact to the levy itself over time. So let's start with what the impact to the average taxpayer would be. So I talked with the assessor's office. Currently, the average assessment in the city of Anacortes is $460,000. Keep in mind, the tax assessment is different from the appraisal or market value, but the average assessment right now is $460,000. So the way the property tax works is you take the assessments for the entire city, which is 4.2 billion, express that in thousands, which is 4.2 million, and then our current property tax levy, which is 5.3 million. So you divide those into each other and you come up with the millage, and that's $1.28 per thousand of assessed value. So if you have a $460,000 house or a $460,000 assessment, that assessment expressed in thousands is 460. So to come up with what the Anacortes tax levy would be on that property, you multiply the millage against the assessment expressed in thousands. So in this case, it'd be $1.28 times 460, and that's $587.96. So that's the city portion of the property tax bill. And a 1% increase on that is just 1% of that total, which is $5.88. So if you think of it in terms of a monthly increase, it'd be 49 cents per month would be the impact of the 1% property tax increase. And looking at, if you look at the last 10 years of our tax levy, starting in 2012, if we looked at what we what we levied from 2012, sorry, let me back up a step. The tax levy increase every year is made up of two parts, and that's the potential 1% increase, which is authorized by City Council, and then the new construction that's added to the tax rolls every year. So that's what makes up the final product. So if you look at a starting point of 4.3 million in 2012, and then every year since then, the city has taken a 1% increase plus new construction, we get to 2022, the request that we'll put into the county is 5.489 million. And that's based on a 1% increase of the 2021 levy plus estimated construction of $50,000. So at that same starting point in 2012, if the city had not taken that 1% increase and just taken or just had increases from the new construction, that same 4.3 million at 2022 would be 5,003,000. So the difference is an additional 485,000 in property tax revenues that the city is receiving now. And if you think of that in terms of staff or budgeting, that's potentially 4 police officers, and it's almost the entire museum budget. The museum budget in 2022 is 512,000. So that 1% increase over the last 10 years pays almost entirely the museum budget. So just those items I wanted to put out there for information before the mayor opens the public hearing. I'd be happy to answer any questions about that or other revenue sources that you might have.
All right, as Steve mentioned, the public hearing on budget revenue sources is open. Hoagland?
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Young?
No, the only comment I really wanted to just emphasize is that, and I really appreciate how this was laid out, the calculations, how they were brought forward, and how we come up with the money that we do. I really appreciate that. I think that the thing that we want to always make sure does not get lost in this process of communicating how we do it is the amount of the increase, which is really only $5 and some cents, which is the thing that we want the public to take away in the long run. The calculations are wonderful to know how we got up with it and what we will use. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is the amount of increase, which I think will matter most to the people that are listening about any increase in taxes. So I'm just pointing that out. Well done, Mr. Hoagland. I really appreciate it. But I just think it's important that we keep saying that so it don't get lost in the conversation.
All right. Any other comments?
Mayor Gear? Oh.
Yes, Mr. Miller.
So I like the new, I guess I like the new way you spin it. Now it's 500,000 over 10 years as opposed to 50,000 in 1 year. That's a new way to go. But as you know, every year I'm always questioning this because I don't think any of our constituents think property taxes have gone down, and we don't have the luxury as property taxpayers and our constituents don't to be able to break it down into 49 cents a month because the overall property tax bill is increasing all the way across. So what I like to try to be able to explain, since this is a yearly approval by the council, is what do we have to apply this $50,000 for? Because I haven't gone through the budget with a fine-tooth comb yet. I've taken a brief look at it, and there's probably a couple $100,000 of things that I have a lot of questions on. So I always feel like this is cart before the horse, that yeah, we do it every year because we do, though Matt usually doesn't vote for it every year. This is just something I would hope that we think about and encourage the public to comment on.
Okay, thank you. Other comments?
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Hoagland.
I did want to point out, just to make sure it's clear, we will be talking more about this in the future. The ordinance for the property tax increase will come back later in the fall. along with, well, actually after we go through the detailed hearings of looking at the budget details.
Okay. So what other comments do you have tonight? Because it says budget or revenue sources. Do you have other comments tonight?
Mayor Gear, the budget that was distributed last week, that's on the city website now, it does include revenue sources as well as as expenditures. I'm happy to field any questions anybody might have, council or citizens. My contact information is on the city website under the finance webpage. Please, nobody hesitate. If you have questions, get a hold of me.
Okay. All right, any other comments or questions from council or the community before I entertain closing this public hearing? All right, if there are no other questions, no other comments, I will close the public hearing on the budget and revenue sources. Thank you. We'll move on now to item B, Ordinance 3097, an interim ordinance extending Ordinance 3076, 3069, 3054, and 3088, a moratorium on the acceptance of certain land use applications in the R4 use zone west of commercial. This is a discussion and possible action this evening. Mr. Meismer?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council and the audience. Ordinance 3097 is an interim ordinance extending the moratorium on accepting applications using the bonus site provisions of Anacortes Municipal Code, Section 19.42.050C, which is the small units option, where 25% of the units, 600 square foot or less, would allow an additional 10 feet above the base height of 40 feet in the R4 use zone. The moratorium applies to the R4 use zone west of the commercial use zone and west of Commercial Avenue. Due to the COVID pandemic, staff have not met the work plan dates and will be returning to City Council with a draft resolution proposing a new work plan for City Council consideration within the next 60 days. Staff received one comment in favor of extending the moratorium, and the moratorium, if extended, would be effective through April 11, 2022. Staff has also prepared a presentation for the Planning Commission for this Wednesday to begin that process of receiving comments from the public and moving through the process of a recommendation from the Planning Commission to the City Council as soon as we can. With that, I thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Walters?
I think this is pretty straightforward. I move approval of the ordinance. Well, wait a minute. We have a public hearing first. Is that right?
No, let's open for a comment, public comment. So let me see if anyone's got their hand up. Is it public hearing? It's a public hearing. Yes. So let's see who we have. All right. I don't see anyone with their hand. Does anyone like to speak that's in attendance this evening on this hearing? I don't see any hands, so, okay, one more time for anyone that would like to speak, because it's a public hearing. All right, I'm going to close the public hearing, and we'll move on to Mr. Walters' comments.
I move approval of the ordinance as presented.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Walters, a second by Mr. Miller. Ms. Hunt, would you call for the vote?
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Walters,
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Carter.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to other business, and we have item 7A. This is open for public comment, and it's the Anacortes Arts Commission update. So, Mr. Lunsford, who do we have here this evening with us?
Evening, Mayor, evening, Council, ladies and gentlemen. So we have our chairperson, Lisa Rhodes, is going to lead off the conversation. She'll be joined by other members of the commission to add in and answer any questions from the council. So with that, I'll give that to Ms. Rhodes.
Thank you.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
We can.
Okay, hello. Thank you for your time tonight. I'm Lisa Rhodes, chairperson of the Anacortes Arts Commission, and I would like to introduce you to or mention the other members of the commission tonight. We have Darlene Klister as our vice chair. We have Betsy Humphrey on the commission, Laura Hamilton, I think she's here tonight, Terry McDonald, and Zach White. We are a volunteer advisory committee to you by ordinance, tasked with acquisition, placement, and maintenance of public art. We are a volunteer advisory committee to you, and we have a wide variety of diverse public art in its collection, and it's an honor to both maintain and add to that art held in public trust. We also foster cultural vision for our community by promoting participation, innovation, and partnerships in all the performing, visual, and literary arts. That's reflected in the Commission's accomplishments over the past 15 years and what we are working on now. And we're excited about our ideas for future projects and partnerships, and we want to tell you about a few of those tonight. The 98221 Artist Studio Tour draws local residents and island visitors directly into the studios of Anacortes artists. It's one of our most successful annual events because it focuses on demonstrating and interacting with the artists in their creative spaces, answering questions and actually educating visitors about how art is created. The studio tour has grown every year in numbers of visitors and in sales for the artists. And we love how it has strengthened our partnerships with Samish Nation Carvers, the Anacortes Arts Festival, and generous local business sponsors. The Madrona Grove Sculpture Garden, located east of the depot just off the plaza, another one of our biggest projects, will resume in March. We are happy to report that Windermere Real Estate will continue its strong sponsorship of this beautiful exhibit. If you haven't strolled through the Madronas that surround these unique sculptures by truly talented area artists, you should plan to do so this spring. Another current project involves a selection of new sculptures, a new sculpture for the Pickett Pocket Park. Skagit Valley artist Joe Treat has created an especially endearing driftwood sculpture that will soon appear in Anacortes' newest park. Once this new work of art is placed and dedicated, we feel sure it will become a popular selfie station. Some of our other programs include Arts for All, offering free classes, hands-on art experiences, including Croatian folk dancing classes taught by the well-known local troupe. The 98221 Gallery is located in the halls and council chambers at City Hall. You've probably noticed this project that offers free, rotating gallery space to artists in the 98221 zip code. As City Hall reopens to the public, we plan to install a new gallery show to coincide with this year's tree lighting event downtown, to offer fresh new art creations for holiday gift giving. We also look forward to participating in the Winter Wonderland Walk again this year at Washington Park, with an interactive display and a selfie station or two there as well. When the pandemic began, the Commission partnered with the Anacortes Arts Festival to place art in empty storefront windows along Commercial Avenue, adding beautiful, cheerful works of art to our main street while safely featuring our local artists during difficult times. Future plans also include revisiting successful art exchange program with Sister City Friends from Sydney, BC, that showcased works of art by artists in both cities. This collaboration with Sister City organizations was popular at both international venues. Currently, we are working in tandem with the Arts Festival and Public Library to update our master list of all public art. From that list, we will create a new free brochure with a detailed touring map to highlight each work of art in our public collection. This will support tourism and enliven art appreciation for both locals and visitors as they explore and experience art in Anacortes. We are also looking into the idea of working with our local poets to create a poetry trail, a self-guided walking tour to provide inspiration along favorite walks in town. We are reaching out to our high school teachers and students to find new ways of highlighting the work of our young people in all the arts. We'd like to have student representation on our commission to gather ideas directly from that age group. In the past, several student photography shows already proved popular, and we'll build on that. And we hope to bridge the channel by working with the new Guimas Island Art Initiative group to create some innovative projects in the near future with the help from our commission member who lives on Guimas, Darlene Klister. So in closing, we thank you all for your time tonight and for your consideration of a line item in the budget this fall to support the myriad arts and artists in our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Rhodes. Council, do you have any questions for Lisa or John? No.
Mayor?
Really? Yes, Mr. Young.
No, I just really wanted to commend the arts for the extraordinary job that they do in our city. It is one of the most beautiful things and attractions to our city. And at the level we display, whether it's on buildings, whether bringing in all the things that we do, it just really is amazing and beautiful. And I just wanted to voice continued support for the work that you guys do to make it such that it attracts so many people and warms all of our hearts. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Young. We really appreciate that. Thank you.
I agree with Mr. Young. I mean, the Arts Commission, we talk about the importance of quality of life and cultural amenities for our citizens, and these commission members work tirelessly year after year to make sure that our art is displayed and enjoyed by the public. So we thank you, Lisa and Commission, for all your work.
Thank you. It's our pleasure.
All right.
Mayor Gear.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yeah, as someone who appreciates the arts and has spent a lot of time on the Anacortes Arts Festival, I just want to say thank you for, growing what the commission is and being willing to partner with other groups in the community. I think that the studio tour is amazing. The Madrona Grove Park is just a real gem for our community to have, where it has that rustic feel and very specific sense of place with the Madrona Grove and the naturalness of it. And I was sad when, because of COVID and quarantine and all of that, we haven't had new artwork come up. So I'm glad that is going to continue in the near future. So thank you. I know it's a lot to figure out the artists, to get them to agree to a piece of work, to get the work to the location, to install it. There's a number of moving parts and that a lot of folks don't see when they walk through that area. So thank you for doing that. And I'm excited about the Sister City Exchange. I think that is a really interesting program. And I'm sorry if I'm not familiar with it yet, but I look forward to seeing more of it. The poetry trail is really cool. I appreciate the Arts Commission, and I hope that we're able to find, ways to more involve you and have more communication with council. And there's, we've got a lot of development happening, so it's important that we have the expertise of the artists and the creative folks who are familiar with public work and our local people. So thank you guys all and there's a number of people on this call too in support and are part of the commission. So thank you all for attending and all of your work over the number of years.
Thank you so much for that commentary. That means a lot. And we feel passionate about volunteering our time and working with the artists in the community. It really is special to us. So thank you for appreciating that.
All right. All right. So wonderful presentation, great discussion. Thank you. And we'll keep watching the good work of the Arts Commission. As Lisa mentioned, there'll be
Thank you, Mary Jo.
new art in the City Council chambers right around the 1st of December. And if you haven't been down to the Greenwich Ferry, they just did an installation there. So,
Mayor Gitt, can I add one thing, if
yes.
it's okay? No, I just really wanted to point out, if I'm correct, the art is for sale as well.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
we're encouraging anybody that sees anything that they think is absolutely beautiful to pick it up. It goes toward a great artist and a great cause.
Yes.
So yeah, that's the reminder I want, because I saw a couple of things that I want to personally purchase.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Yes, thank you for reminding us that. Yes.
All right. Great discussion, great presentation.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. At this time, I'll move on to item 7B. This is open for comment. It's Resolution 3055, waiving the state competitive bidding requirements for the purchase of the Craley Sensing PermaSense Leak Monitor System. Mr. Buckemeyer, are you on the call?
I am. Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. See how that goes. Here. Slideshow.
We can see it.
All right, good. All right, there we go. Yeah, thank you again, Mayor and Council. We really have two items on the agenda tonight, and I don't know how to separate them out, so I'm just going to blend the thing together and give my presentation. So we'll see how it goes. I've got 15 slides, 5 topics. It's going to go pretty quick because a lot of this is recap, I think. But I kind of boiled down the 5 topics into what is this thing, where's it going to go, what's it going to do, what are the benefits of it, how much is it going to cost, and what's the sole source justification? Why is this the only one that's out there? So in a nutshell, Craley Sensing is a hardware and software package that uses fiber optics to detect the acoustical signature of a water leak. It's also used to detect the acoustical signature of above or below ground activities such as valves being opened, construction activity, vehicles, people, animals walking or driving within the vicinity of the fiber optic cable. The device sends a constant signal through the fiber, so it allows the activity to be detected in real time. You don't got to wait till the next day to discover something happened. You see it as it happens. A couple slides here of just kind of what the details of the thing are. So the Craley Sensing application uses a single fiber strand to do its work. It doesn't take a bunch of them. It's attached to one end of the fiber optic strand and sends a signal down the entire to the end of the strand. So there's no additional like equipment or power or anything else needed. It's just one spot. And you can see there that that's what we have now. We have a fiber optic cable in our water line looking exactly like that. So this would use one fiber out of that strand. Ours are about this far apart, and this thing that we're buying, it can monitor up to 25 miles in each direction. Okay, so this is kind of more of what it looks like. It's a typical, I think it's about 4 feet high. It's just like a server rack that we have anywhere else. It's loaded up with components. Those are some of the components on the upper right-hand side. And How the thing works is sort of that bundle of stuff there. It receives the signal from the pipe and sends it to a screen that an operator can see. And this would be monitored by our water treatment plant staff they're there 24/7. So this is kind of a high-level view of what we plan on doing. We plan on locating this device somewhere in the Sharps Corner vicinity, and that would allow it to go 3 different directions. One would go out back to the water plant along that route that you see in the background there. The other one would go westerly. A signal would go westerly and reach the rest of the pipe as it goes into the city. And then the other one would go to the south, where we've got there's pipelines along the route all the way to Deception Pass Bridge. So this is kind of a regional look at it. Again, we would go send that signal to the east, to the water plant, to the west or northwest into town, and then south to Deception Pass Bridge. And then eventually, we were in negotiations or discussions, I guess, with the town of Oak Harbor, the city of Oak Harbor, and they would like that same benefit to go all the way into town, into their town, which could be accomplished by the central location where we plan on putting this thing. Okay, so benefits and needs. I'm gonna talk a little bit about these first 3, but I want to come back to that on the next slide. So this is just sort of again an overview. So one of the biggest benefits is in the event of an earthquake or a surface disruption, like if something else happens, we can evaluate the integrity of that water line before we return it to service. We don't want to pressurize something if it's been damaged and there's no way to know it. Today, all we would be able to do would be to turn it on and see where the water spurts out, and that would tell us. A second benefit is to be able to detect and repair small leaks that are not noticeable. They're unnoticeable right now. They just soak into the ground, which results in water loss and increases our repair costs. A third benefit would be we can use this technology as part of our security measures to detect unauthorized entry into sites where we have installed fiber. And I'll talk about that in this next slide. There's also, comes with this is the ability to provide perimeter intrusion detection for any site that has a buried perimeter fiber strand. I've got a picture of that coming up too. So basically you can detect activity that's not within a water line that could maybe just be as someone approaches a fence. And we've discussed this before too, but our 2021 risk and resiliency study did identify this as a top priority to get this type of device in place. It identified the #1 threat to our system is physical security of our distribution system. So I want to talk about a couple of those just a little bit here now. Okay, so as far as leak detection goes, I got a couple of inquiries from council members, and they wanted me to talk about this a little bit. So the Anacortes system experienced about 248 million gallons of leakage, system leakage in 2020. So this device, this product, this is not going to eliminate all that water loss leakage. It's going to be hard to determine exactly how much this will eliminate or allow us to eliminate. For certain, some of it will be eliminated by the system. This will find out, where the leaks are and allow us to fix them. Not all of it though. So, but doing that, it costs money to produce the water, to pump the water, to get it here. And if it's leaking out somewhere, that's wasted money on both ends. So I guess what I want to say is, if a return on investment is the deciding factor, on this, that's not going to be an overwhelming factor to consider. Reducing water loss is a benefit, and it will happen. It's just going to be difficult to calculate how much is going to happen until we know how much it helps us with. But the system integrity following an event, that has the greatest potential benefit, I believe. When we have the next earthquake and our shake alert system that we've got in place shuts our system down, this device, this product, is going to allow us to determine the integrity of the water system before we turn it back on. So we won't be repressurizing the system with a small break. If there's some small break out there and we repressurize it, that could cause a catastrophic failure. It could, turn into something big. So the faster we know where the breaks are and what size they are, the faster we can get the system turned back on. That to me is one of the biggest benefits, the greatest potential benefit of it. The second one is another, I think, great benefit is this unauthorized or even authorized intrusions, right? This will allow us to determine real time when somebody operates a valve or opens a valve box or even gets into a valve box and begins to work on the fiber optic system, or somebody that shouldn't be working on the fiber optic system, or somebody that digs next to the system, just a construction activity within in the proximity of the system, the pipe system. This is going to allow us to know that the minute it happens, right? We're going to real time. This thing's operating 24/7. So that's a real, in my mind, a real big benefit. Just a snapshot of the risk and resiliency study. The major themes of it there: physical security of all the water distribution systems. This was identified in that 2020 study. It was actually, when the author of this thing discovered it, he actually sent me a letter before the study was published to say, hey, we should move on this thing, on this system. So before the study was even out. This is okay. So this is a little a diagram or whatever demonstration of how this thing works. So if a car drives near the pipe, if somebody starts jackhammering or if somebody opens a valve vault, we know right away that that's happening. The other thing that it does or can do is you can take a fiber strand out of the water line, okay, so it's no longer in the water line, bury it around the perimeter of a site, outside the fence, if you will, inside the fence, whatever, just bury it around the outside. And that will also allow us to detect activity, in proximity. Okay, that's where it's at, where it's going to go, what it does, and okay, how much it's going to cost. You saw that's in the contract there. It's going to cost approximately $400,000. This is a regional customer capital expense. It's not all of that cost is borne by City of Anacortes customers. We are about an 11% customer to our own system. So we would pay 11% of this thing over 20 years. What that equates to is the average residential customer is going to pay about 25 cents a year for 20 years. We did already include the cost of this in our recent municipal bond issue, and that amount was $500,000. So this actually does allow us, that there's some bond money left to maybe you do some additional security measures in the water system. We're hearing that the timeline this thing will be operational about 4 months. It was quicker than that, but overseas COVID delays, we're just figuring about 4 months from the time we say go. Okay, sole source justification. So our research has identified only one other product on the global market today that is even close. And this other product just doesn't fit our needs. It's an above ground, out of pipe solution that focuses on gas and oil applications. So what it does is it buries a fiber optic cable in the ground or above the ground on top of a pipe and allows, uses that to accomplish not everything that this will do. But we specifically need we need something that's going to work with what we have. So we have a pipe, a fiber optics pipe or cable in the pipe, and that's what we have to. That's what we're looking for. Something that's specifically used with potable water systems and is specifically compatible with our Craley Optics fiber inside our water pipe. And this Craley sensing product is a patented product that achieves our goals and obviously is compatible with their own system. So, okay, so that was the last slide. It went fast. Questions?
Okay. Well, I'd like to, yes, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Were you going to go somewhere else?
I was going to say I wanted us to focus on item B and then C, but go ahead and ask your questions and then I'll take it one action item at a time.
Okay. Fred, I just had a question about, of course it makes sense, Craley, because they put the fiber in our lines anyway. And so, for example, if it's a 188 fiber strand, it's going to take one of those strands to use the sensing system. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, that's correct. Yep.
If it's so, I can't remember what strands we have in what pipes. And then can
288 in there.
Oh, that's right, 288 strand. Okay, so that's good. And then how does this work with because we approved our new metering, and I know that's primarily retail side of it. Can you tell us if those are, anyway, I think they're not compatible at all. It's just one is more on the far end and the other is more the wholesale side of it.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so they're both going to help us detect leaks. The new meters will allow real-time data gathering on the retail side of it. So from the meter to your house, right, if there's an issue in there. And this will target the big transmission lines coming from the water plant into town.
Gotcha. And I think you said we can tie it into the shake alert system as well.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that's great. So, yep, shake alert.
Awesome.
Yeah, that helps us detect earthquakes and shuts the system down, and we don't want to turn it back on if there's a problem.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Buckemeyer? All right.
Here.
Yes, Mr. Walters.
I just wanted to note that I don't think that we have approved the new meters yet, and I am not yet sold on the new meters because they are a much larger expense than this. This is a pretty small expense, and it's wholesale or the regional system, so it's spread around quite a bit more than our retail meter system is. But given the cost of this, right around $300,000, I think that this makes sense for the benefit that it provides us, especially if we're able to also provide this benefit to Oak Harbor and recoup some of the cost.
All right, so let's take item 7B first. Here, if anyone in the audience wants to comment, any attendee, it's open for public comment. All right, I don't see any hands up. So council, we have resolution 3055, waiving the state competitive bidding requirement for the purchase of the Craley Sensing PermaSense leak monitor system. What discussion and possible action on this item would you like to take?
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Young.
No, I just wanted to speak to where we are, just in the need to ensuring our safety, our water safety and the infrastructure. I think that this is not a large expense, but it is something that could bear fruit for us in the long term by way of ensuring the safety of our infrastructural side. I just think that if we use it correctly and also as Mr. Walter said, could recover some of the costs by, other like Oak Harbor or just working with these systems, we win. And so I'm okay with it.
All right.
Thank you.
Here.
Mr. Walters.
I move approval of the resolution as presented.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Walters, a second by Ms. Cleveland McGrath to approve Resolution 3055 as presented. Ms. Hunt, would you take the vote?
Mr. Walters,
Yes.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. We'll move on now to item 7C. This is a contract award for the Sensing PermoSense Leak Monitoring and Asset Security System. And this is also a discussion with a possible action. Open for public comment, too. I don't see any hands from the public, so it's back to you, council.
Mayor here.
Mr. Walters.
I move approval of the contract as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Walters, a second by Mr. Young to approve the contract award as presented. Ms. Hunt, would you take the vote?
Ms. Cleveland McGrath,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buckemeyer. All right, this time we'll move on to item 7D, which is also open for public comment. It's Resolution 3052, establishing the city's use of the American Rescue Plan Act funds. This is a discussion with possible action this evening. Mr. Hoagland.
Steve, you're muted.
Oh, so sorry. Okay, so we've simplified this resolution from what we first presented a week or two ago. We still have the whereases about using, building out our fiber, assisting low-income residents, but in the whereases, sorry, not the whereases, in the therefore section now, be it resolved by the city of Anacortes, the replacement of revenue lost due to the recession brought on by COVID is approved for the ARPR funds. So as we showed last week, the entirety of our ARP distribution would qualify for revenue replacement through use of that calculator that we looked at last week. So this just, it simplifies the accounting and the reporting for the use of this fund by putting all of that into revenue replacement. The next item on the agenda you may have seen is another resolution identifying the aid to the family center that we talked about last week. So just simplifying those actions, removing the aid to the family center to its own resolution, and then making this ARP money just revenue replacement. So I'm happy to answer questions you may have about this. I can talk about the other resolution supporting the family center at this time, or if you want to take action here or have a discussion on this ARP resolution first, whatever your pleasure is.
Let's do one at a time. So what's your discussion on Resolution 3052, council and or the public? Awfully quiet.
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Young?
Short of any differing view, I move to approve Resolution 3052.
Right.
Second.
So we have a motion by Mr. Young, a second by Mr. Miller, and I don't see any member of the public with their hand up. So, Mr. Walters.
Yeah, I just note that this is basically exactly what we talked about last time. And it just simplifies the accounting, as Mr. Hoagland said, and frees us up to do other things without the grant reporting.
Thank you. So, Ms. Hunt, would you take the vote on Resolution 3052 for approval?
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Walters,
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So we'll move on now to 7E, open for public comment, Resolution 3056, Community City Funds to support the Anacortes Family Center Affordable Housing Project. Discussion with possible action.
Mayor Gear,
Mr. Hoagland.
if I may
Yes.
just quickly, I'll go over the main points of the resolution. So as have been discussing, this is a separate resolution to support the Family Center along the lines of what we talked about a week ago. I did want to point out that we worked closely with the City Attorney's Office on drafting this to ensure that there wasn't an issue with the gifting of public resources. The Family Center would fall within the aid to the poor and infirm that's allowed in the state constitution. So we don't believe there's any risk of a gifting with this issue.
Thank you. Members of the audience or council, what are your thoughts?
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Walters.
Well, again, I think this is right in line with what we discussed last time. So if there's no other discussion, I don't mean to cut off any discussion, but otherwise I'd move approval of the resolution as presented.
Mr. Mayor Gear,
Mr. Young.
I just have one point of clarity, and Mr. Walters, if you won't mind, I just got a question because I'm agreeing with you. My question is the last line of the summary. It says the AFC has requested a commitment from the city for future funding to secure permanent financing for the project. Does that statement mean that any additional funding that's necessary, it may not come before council for us to approve it individually? I was just trying to make sure that it didn't commit us beyond what we're already committed to, because we love this project and we think that it's absolutely what we need. I just was trying to seek clarity on that last line of the statement. I'm a supporter of the project. I want to be clear. I love what the Family Center is doing, which is extraordinary. It's desperately needed in our community. But I was curious about that last line and wondered if you would tell me what that means.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, actually. That's a really good point. So what we were trying to illustrate there is the Family Center, to secure their financing, needed to illustrate that they had this $500,000 pledge, but they didn't necessarily need the cash at this time. So what we were trying to illustrate there is that the pledge for $500,000 is there at the time that the Family Center needs that. So it's mainly for that assurance that in the future, at some point next year, they'll be coming back for the actual for that actual cash.
I totally get that, and I am in agreement with it. I was just trying to make sure that it didn't automatically bind us to additional things that we haven't had a chance to review. I'm sure they'll be wonderful, but I just wanted to make sure of that, and I think you've assured me of that, and I'm okay with moving forward if my understanding is correct, and I will second the motion of Mr. Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Is there any other additional comments?
Yeah, Mayor Gear.
Ms. McClellan McGrath.
Yeah, I would like to abstain from voting on this. I am on the Family Center board. And just so that everything is on the up and up, I will refrain.
All right, thank you. So at this time, we have a motion by Mr. Walters, a second by Mr. Young to approve Resolution 3056. Ms. Hunt, would you call for the vote?
Mr. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Walters,
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath is abstaining. Mr. Miller,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you. All right, at this time, we'll move on to item 7F. This is open for public comment. It is the 2022 to the 2027 Capital Facilities Plan, Part 2 of 2, and this is all other departments this evening besides Public Works. Mr. Hoagland.
Thank you, Mayor. So similar to what we did last week, I'd like to work through the different departments, the different department CFP requests, and then please don't hesitate to ask questions or make comments as we go through these various departments. So we went through all of Public Works last week. This is the rest of the departments, and we're going to start with the fiber department. So the first project for fiber is the continued expansion of the fiber internet backbone, and it's in the EDA grant area, which is the yellow highlighted area here in this small picture. But this is scheduled for next year, 2022, at an estimated cost of $5.4 million. And we're hoping for a grant of $2.2 million. The rest of that listed as contributions is actually grant funding. So a total of $5.4 million next year in the EDA grant area.
So, Mr. Hoagland, am I not correct? Haven't we been approved for that EDA grant, or is that still pending?
I believe Ms. Shu is on the line. Perhaps she can address.
Mayor and Mayor and Council, yes, the city is continuing with kind of checking all the boxes on that grant from the EDA. So that $2.25 million will offset the cost of that project at $5.4 million. And so the contributions will be probably a mixture of ARPA funding. Also, we're applying for some additional grants and or line of credit.
Okay, thank you.
The next fiber project we have is the Guaymas View area. So that's in the blue highlighted area here in the picture. That's also scheduled for next year at an anticipated cost of $3.88 million. The last fiber project is this South Fidalgo Bay area, which is the purple highlighted area here in the map. That's for the following year in 2023, estimated cost of $3 million and a combination of grants and credit for funding sources. So those three areas, I believe, are the total fiber CFP requests at this point. Any questions, Council, before we move on? So the next department we'll look at is the fire department. So the first item is ladder truck training tower, and that's scheduled for 2023 at an estimated cost of $54,000. We have it listed as taxes, so what the idea is there is that'll just be worked into the annual budget at that point in 2023. The next project we have is the main fire station upgrade. That's scheduled for 2024 at estimated cost of $1 million. Next project.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Walters.
So the main fire station 1 upgrade, construction remodel of additional apparatus bay, is that Is that the thing for the antique fire truck?
No, I don't believe so. Is Chief on?
Yes, ma'am. Madam Mayor, members of council. No, that'll come up later in this. This was an anticipated upgrade. There's still some questions there as to which of those projects will go forward. A little bit of it's going to hinge on the Station 3 construction designs that start to come in and where this will go.
So there is a need for an additional apparatus bay for a functioning piece of equipment at Fire Station 1, or maybe not, depending on the design of Station 3? Is that what
I would say maybe not. My current plan, with if not everything goes as expected, is all reserve apparatus and additional apparatus would be at the new Station 3, and the antique would be displayed here at Station 1 so that it's downtown and accessible by the public. That's the current plan. This Station 1 upgrade actually, it predates, it's been in, I believe, the CFP for a number of years in a plan. Things have kind of been evolving and changing. Didn't want to completely remove it because, again, we don't know the time, how the RFPs are going to come back for Station 3 and also exactly what the needs are going to be, if that makes sense.
Okay. So this indicates we would consider a bond for this project, and it's, you know, fairly hefty in size, $1 million. I don't feel like the description of the project is detailed enough for me to really evaluate it. At least at the time at which we would actually go out to do this work.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And this, the financing strategy is kind of evolving. We've talked about internally with the chief and mayor, we've talked about a couple of things. And that's one of the things that we talked about to get Fire Station 3 going, you know, permanent station, considering rolling the requirements for the Station 1 upgrade into that same bond issue, just to try and take advantage of, you know, economies of scale.
That part makes sense to me. If the need is there, I just feel like we need to have good descriptions to be able to justify the project at the outset.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I concur, especially the way, you know, Chief Harris is talking about, you know, it kind of depends what happens with Station 3. It makes sense that should we determine that this is the right answer is going this way, then bonding for both of them together makes sense with all of the requirements laid out in that.
Okay. All right, to be determined, it looks like.
Excuse me, the next item we have is fire station facility equipment. So this is what we ended up doing is transferred these items to the city facilities department, who ends up working those projects anyway. So we took them out of here, they're in the facilities section so that we didn't double count those. So the next project, the Marsh Point Fire Station, which would be Station 3. So this is scheduled 2023, estimated cost of $4 million, exactly what we were just talking about with potential bond issue to support that.
Here.
Yes, Mr. Walters.
We put money in the 2021 budget to fund a feasibility analysis or needs analysis for Fire Station 3. And if I recall correctly, the RFP for that went out only recently. So do I understand correctly that we don't have the results of that study yet that would give us the actual price tag for this facility?
If I may, Madam Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that is accurate. The RFP just went out, and only the preliminary, there were 14 candidates that responded back to it, but there's been no more movement. Now they have to provide some more information before we make a decision. It'll be late in the year, if at all, in 2021 to get those numbers. I don't believe that we'll see a true number until early 2022.
All right.
Okay. So maybe we maybe we should document those types of things in the CFP, you know, the fact that we don't have a hard number, or the fact that we do have a hard number. I mean, none of the numbers are hard, I suppose, until we go out to bid, but at least, you know, they're informed estimates. What's the contributions line mean under funding sources?
Right. We don't have a line for, you know, debt or bond issue, so that's what we're using when we need that. When we're thinking of debt as the resource, we've been placing it in that contributions line.
Okay.
Maybe not ideal. We can look at maybe adjusting that next year. That's a fair point. Any additional questions? This is a good discussion on this project. Any additional questions on the Station 3 before we move on? The next project is fire engines, and we have $645,000 budgeted in 2025. Next item is the rescue truck. This is for next year, $200,000. Anticipated use of impact fees for that. The next project is ambulances. 2024, $250,000, and 2026, $265,000. EMS and fire equipment. So from 15,000 starting next year, 14,000 the following year, 97,000 in 24, 99,000 in 25. And again, this is one of those items listed in the tax line that we would anticipate just working into the existing budget.
Mayor Gear?
Yes, Mr. Walters.
Are these items expensive enough to work into ER&R, or are they individually not expensive enough for that? Or is there some other reason we don't include it in ER&R?
Yeah, some of these items, it's a good question. Some of these items are kind of in that gray area where they're not obviously equipment that we would automatically include in ER&R. So I believe that's why we were looking at it in this way, is that those are currently not included in ER&R, so we need to work those into the budget. Some of these other items, I don't think I made that clear, like the ambulances here. We have the funding source listed as fund balance, and those that are worked into the ER&R budget, those have existing resources to replace those. So that's where that money will come from. But these pieces are smaller and not the case.
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Miller.
I think when it seems like subconsciously or not, we include the expensive vehicles not in ER&R and make them capital facilities. And following up is, should we have a number in mind? Like when it comes to solid waste trucks, you know, we kind of separate those out. They're not ER&R. So maybe rather than subconsciously, we should have a number associated with it. If the vehicle costs more than $200,000, then it's a capital expense as opposed to tying it to ER&R fund. Just something for you budget superstars to figure out.
Good point.
Next item is the command vehicle. This would be in 2026 at $80,000. Next item is the ladder truck, and this is scheduled for next year, $1.5 million. And what we're looking at for funding there, that's worked into our annual budget, is the loan program that the State Treasurer's Office offers. They have very competitive rates. When we checked the rates last time, it was 0.94% fixed rate for 10 years. So the idea would be to work this into our annual budget, the funding source for 10 years, and then the second 10 years, 11 through 20, continue continue to pay that to ourselves in the ER&R fund so that at the end of the 20-year life, we would have the cash to replace that ladder truck next time.
Mr. Walters.
I think the description here is a really good example of a good description that justifies the expense. And then also the note about the low interest loan option is useful. I don't mean to pick on fire, but this particular one, I think, is what I'd prefer to see. It's very concise, but still compelling and tells the story. And it's what I'd prefer to see for really all the projects in the CFP.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Miller.
Mr. Hoagland, what about our fire impact fees? Is that not part of this number?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question. So we didn't work that into it. Our projections wouldn't support like making the debt service with the fire impact fees every year. So we were.
Well, I think that's something we need to look into, because that's the whole reason why we passed the fire impact fees, were basically certain size buildings and to be able to pay for something like a ladder truck. Unless I forgot why we voted that increase of the impact fees, we should probably put it to where we said we were going to put it. But just something to, I know it complicates the loan plan probably, but then ultimately I have to ask, why are we collecting the impact fee?
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a fair point. And that's we could easily work that into the budget on an annual basis. You know, use those impact fees, and if there's a deficit we need to make up, we can make it up through the annual budget, but kind of plan on those impact fees otherwise.
Okay. Thank you.
Next project is the antique engine display. So we don't have a picture for this. But it came up a little bit ago, but that's what we're planning on for 2023 at $180,000, and this would be at Station 1 to work that into the footprint. I believe, yeah, 180,000. I believe that's the last project for
And
fire.
that would be from donations or contributions, okay.
Yeah, so we have that as the resource, the funding source listed as contributions, exactly. Council, any questions on fire before we move on? Next section is general government. So the first project we have is pre-soak piling removal and replacement at the city-owned dock. And this is scheduled in 2024 to cost $32,000. Next project is Community Youth Center. Estimated at $20 million in 2023.
And this was put in at a time we were applying for a grant, correctly? Is that correct?
I'm sorry, Mayor, I wasn't involved with that application.
Okay, yeah, I believe it's, yeah, all right. I go down, what are you putting as the grants? Yes, all right, so we're looking for grants or contributions. Thank you.
Next project is a generator at City Hall. So we currently have a generator. It's pretty small. This would be full-size generator to power the building. Estimated cost at $100,000 in 2023.
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Walters.
We spent quite a bit more than that for the generator at the library. And that didn't go very well. Have we completely anticipated all the real expenses associated with this?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I'm not stretching my expertise a little bit here. I did talk with our facilities about, not about this generator in particular, but the one at the library. And I was surprised to find out how the costs have changed over the last several years. There's a soundproofing muffling kit that they can put on the generator there. I think, I want to say the cost for that was like $50,000, or they could replace the entire generator for something like $75,000. But you're right, the initial costs at the library were significantly more than that to begin with.
The problem with the generator is that you've got to run it to keep it in good condition once a week. And when you're generating that much noise, a significant impact. So you're not just running it when the power's out. So I want to make sure that this project, that our stamp of approval as City Council isn't on this project unless it's got all of the noise shrouds or whatever other systems are required to constrain the impact on the neighbors. You got businesses and you got residences right next to City Hall. So we need to increase that number to make sure that we are capturing those costs completely. Or better yet, if we believe that that's the right number, just say that we will include noise control or something like that in the description to commit us to it.
Point. Next project is various maintenance projects. So it's something we kind of mentioned in the fire department, but this is something that council sees on an ongoing basis, identified at $600,000 a year. And this is something that we generally use REIT 1 to pay for those qualifying projects. Next project is an ERP system, Enterprise Resource Planning. So we wanted a marker in the CFP just so there's visibility on this. We put $1 million in 2024. The price, that price seems to be, depending on the system we've talked to, there's been some variation, but that seems to be a pretty accurate price. And it's also a pretty lengthy implementation period. They generally talk about a 12 to 24 month implementation period too. But our system that we're using now, it's over 20 years old. It is aging. The company doesn't sell this model anymore that we're using, the system that we're using. So it's, you know, the end of life is on the horizon. Solar panels, next project at the operations facility. This is scheduled for next year, a cost of $200,000. Next project will be re-roofing the house out at Washington Park. Next year, scheduled for $30,000. This is the building at the cemetery, re-roofing that project, or I'm sorry, re-roofing that building at a cost of $10,000 next year. This is the booster station at Blue Heron's, at Blue Heron Drive, Blue Heron Circle. In 2023, at a cost of $35,000. So this is listed in the general government department because it's the facilities department that would oversee this project, but the cost of this would be allocated to the water utility. This is another building at Washington Park, re-roofing, 2023 at $18,000. Next project is re-roofing the wastewater treatment plant headworks building. In 2024, at a cost of $23,000. Again, this would be allocated to the wastewater utility, but the project would be run by the facilities department. The next project, another re-roofing at the wastewater plant. 2024 for $25,000. Re-roofing the solids handling building in the year 2025 for $40,000. This is re-roofing the water treatment A Avenue booster station. This is out in 2026 at a cost of $8,000. Re-roofing another booster station, 2026 for $5,000. This is a generator at the senior center in 2023 for $100,000. This would be for the City Hall seismic retrofit, $100,000 in 2022. The next project is New City Hall at a cost of $20 million in the year 2025. And that's the final project in general government. So council, any questions on general government CFP before we move on to Parks Capital?
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Walters.
Mr. Hoagland, what do you imagine the import is of us approving a CFP that includes some of these projects? So for instance, New City Hall, we've really never talked about.
Yes, so I guess similar to the ERP, we want something like this to be kind of on the in view, in sight, something that has been talked about at various times, never at a really serious level, but it's kind of a marker so that we wouldn't lose sight of that potential need for a new city hall.
Well, so as a general matter, I tend to think that those less defined projects should be part of the 20-year needs analysis that's part of the capital facilities element, but that the capital facilities financing plan, the 6-year plan, should have realistic projects that actually have funding associated with them over the 6 years.
So it's a fair point. We do have a few of these in here in the general government that are just kind of markers, so we don't lose sight of them, but perhaps they'd be better suited to the long-term element that we have here in the CFP and not part of the 6-year plan. Because
I think so. I think that innovation, that additional projects for the remaining time in the planning period is a useful one to keep track of things, but not actually commit to them.
Other thoughts?
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Miller?
Yeah, I agree. Inside the 6-year plan, we ought to have pretty solid, or at least somewhat solid funding sources identified and somewhat agreed on from a council perspective, but otherwise leave them on the other list, just as that marker.
Sure. Yep, it's a good point. I'm happy to make that change, move a couple of these. So what I'm thinking of is the things that we would be moving off would be the new city hall, and then perhaps the community center, depending on how those grant applications are turning out. Okay, any additional questions on general government?
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Walters?
The community center, if we are applying for grants and want to be able to apply for grants, they may require us to have the project actually listed in the CFP.
Yeah.
That may be a reason to have it listed near term. Also, I would expect that we would build it near term if we receive that grant, or if we downsize the project to be within the available private contributions. So I guess I would advocate leaving that one in the main body of the CFP, but include the caveat that it's not a capacity project. We don't need it for concurrency. It's a nice to have, and it's one that wouldn't move forward if we couldn't fit it within the available funding.
Yeah, I concur, and it's still a topic of discussion on a pretty ongoing basis, and there are some opportunities. So it is much more real at this point than a new city hall. So I think it would be good to leave it for now with, you know, a tie to, it has to have contributions or donations or grants.
I also, I think not include the seismic retrofit, because I don't believe $100,000 is a real number for that. Not for a retrofit that would actually solve the seismic problems.
Yeah, I don't know.
And it would be important, I would think, to do a fire retrofit and possibly an elevator retrofit at the same time, that we've got the building torn apart. So I don't know that I would want to do that in 2022 either. And it seems like that project needs quite a bit more development. So maybe it also moves to the future list.
Mr. Young, did you also have a comment?
Yes. Well, no, I just wanted to comment. I agree with Mr. Walters and Mr. Miller. However, I really wanted to, again, bring up the point that the seismic retrofit for the existing building has been part of the discussion, I think, for quite some time. There have been a variety of studies, as I understand, prior to my coming on council, and the discussion of what we will do in preparation when and should we have a significant seismic event. I think that's important. And I like the idea that we're having a discussion about it. Maybe not in the immediate sense, but I do like the idea that we have it on the horizon. We know that we will need to deal with it in some capacity going forward, as we will need to have that conversation between what it will really take to bring the existing building up to par, seismically, any of those other retrofits, versus comparing that to another new city hall. So I do like the idea that, when we're looking this far in advance out to 2027, I think that it behooves us to begin that conversation. It may not be an urgent matter, but it is a conversation we need to have and decide how we might want to begin to address it.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Gear.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the idea of pulling items off that aren't of immediate concern. But to qualify, to be able to apply for grants and qualify, part of it is we have to have this on the capital facilities. Is there a way we can essentially just have a separate color or some kind of identifier that says, these are the important projects, like the re-roofing, that are significantly less cost that we definitely need to get done. Otherwise, we are in a situation where we have deferred maintenance that is going to cost us more, versus some of those nice to haves that, we want to have that on the horizon. Because when we do talk about doing a new generator, and we talk about having to put in, the seismic retrofit and some of the other issues with revamping our existing city hall versus considering a new city hall and what that looks like. And I think that this is like a conversation with City Hall, for example, especially in light of our new work from home or remote work policies and where we're going for the next 20, 30, 40 years. That is a separate conversation. But while I agree there's a number of these projects where if the general public looks and says, we don't have the funds to do all of these projects, it would be nice to be able to say, these are projects we're working on, but these are our must-have top-tier things of deferred maintenance, maintenance for concurrency of development, which is really important. I think that if you look at I don't know, $1 million here versus $1.5 million for a fire truck that had the ladder truck. I mean, part of us needing that is because we are expecting taller buildings, and we need to be able to have the appropriate response for our community. So, yeah, I know color code sounds fairly simplistic, but might be helpful for organizing my thoughts and the general public's thoughts.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Walters.
I think Ms. Cleland McGrath is on completely the right course here. We need to identify projects like the ladder truck that need to be replaced, that we also must have to provide service. The generator, I don't think falls into that category. The question of City Hall is a functioning building. It's a risk analysis thing. So that is also not a capacity project. We have capacity with the existing building. So it's not required. We need to distinguish between those ones that are absolutely required and the ones that we just really want to do, maybe the Community Youth Recreation Center at whatever the right number is with funding that is actually available. But then we need to be able to do the math and show that impact fees are going to generate enough money to pay for the projects that are identified as using them, or the other funding sources, whether it's the rates or general fund dollars. It's that math equation at the end of the document that is the most important part of this. Otherwise, it is just a wish list again, which we have been, I thought, trying to get away from. Because a wish list is not very useful as a planning tool, and it's not very useful as a document that can be used to do the calculations required to levy impact fees. We really have got to get to the point where it's doing the math for us and showing us that we've got the money to pay for the projects, and that it at least works out on that 6-year period. Now, Mr. Hoagland mentioned last time that maybe the new software that he has been looking at would help us out with that. And I haven't seen that yet, but maybe that's the case, and maybe we could get that near term and get these projects plugged into there so that we could be using them for budgeting. I don't really want to go another year where we don't have that math equation that shows us that these projects can actually be paid for.
Great, good conversation. All right, Steve, go ahead.
So the next department is Parks, if we're ready to move on. Parks Capital. So the first project is Parks Infrastructure. This is to address aging infrastructure needs as we move through the planning period. So $50,000 identified in 23, 2025, and in 2027. And those would be REIT funded, REIT 1. The next project is the Grandview Cemetery Improvement Expansion. This project is actually being worked this year. We don't have any funding identified here. It's kind of a carryover project. It should wrap up before the end of the year. The next one is Washington Park Restroom and Infrastructure. This is scheduled for next year, $325,000 and a variety of resources. So taxes, REIT, grants, and contributions. And I wanted to talk about this one. This is a project that we've talked about at least at the committee level. So so the $95,000 in taxes, that's from the LID reserve fund that we had. And there was, I believe it was through a budget ordinance that we had language to eliminate or extinguish that LID reserve fund, so there was no longer a need for it. and we moved that cash into currently residing in the general fund, and it'll go into the parks capital fund. But we talked about projects that would make sense to try and use that LID reserve money, a community project that that could benefit from that money, because the leftover money was essentially from other community projects that were done in the past. So those are the funding sources for that. It's a neat project that is scheduled for next year. So next project is Pocket Park. This would be on South Commercial Avenue, scheduled out in 2025 for $150,000, partially grant funded. The next.
Mayor Gear?
Yes, Mr. Walters.
And do I take it we don't have a location for that yet, other than South Commercial?
Is Mr. Lunsford on the line? I'm not sure about that.
I'm here. So we would look at, Mr. Walters, at alleyways, right-of-ways that we might be able to use as we did at 21st and Commercial between Jimmy John's and Penguin. So we would try to identify something like that and then talk to the landowners abutting as we did at the other location and see where we could make that fit. But it's a popular park. It's been used well at 21st and Commercial, and we'd like to replicate it if there's room to do that in the south
For
end.
sure. Yeah, I'm just wondering if we've identified some candidates.
Not decisively.
Okay.
The next project is Heartlake Improvements. This would be per the Heartlake Master Plan, scheduled in 2025 at $500,000 through a combination of grants and cash. Next project is H Avenue Stream Restoration and Education Trail. This is scheduled out in 2027 through grants and REIT. The next project is the Tommy Thompson Trestle and Causeway Replacement Project. So this is scheduled next year, $350,000, primarily through grant funds. The next project is Washington Park Campground Improvements. $50,000, primarily for electrical panel work, and that'll be REIT 1. And the next project is the Cap Santa Lookout and Trail Improvements. Scheduled next year for $125,000 and funded through contributions. Next project is Storbrick Park Field Lighting. This is scheduled out in 2026 for $700,000 through a variety of resources, including REIT, impact fees, and grants. The next project is Storbrick Park Small Courts Makeover. This is scheduled in 2024 at a cost of $40,000. Next project is Bicycle and Pedestrian Connections. Scheduled in 2024 for $50,000. The next project is Ace of Hearts Restrooms and Upgrades. And this is out in 2026, $500,000 through impact fees, grants, and contributions. The next project is Heartlake Water Quality, out in 2027, cost of $300,000, grant funded and city cash. The next project is Westside Park at 6th and Minnesota, scheduled in 2025 for $400,000 through a variety of funding sources, including impact fees, contributions, and cash. Next project is Ship Harbor Wetland Trail. Scheduled out in 2026 at $300,000 through impact fees, grants, and contributions. The next project is the skate park replacement. In 2024, estimated cost of $500,000 through grants and contributions. The next project is N Avenue Park Improvements, scheduled next year, 2022, at a cost of $20,000. I believe that's the last project. So any questions, council, or comments on Parks Capital? As that is, that's the last of our CFP.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Miller.
I think the only general comment I have is I'm a little confused, or I think somebody brought up a good point, debt versus contributions. I think we should be very clear about if we're putting some debt to something versus a contribution. And maybe there's some better way to say that, but we shouldn't be afraid to tell it like it is when we lay it out in our capital facilities plan. So contribution seems to me a different thing than debt.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point. It was just the way the template is laid out, but there's no reason we can't make those adjustments on an ad hoc basis this year, right, and then maybe change next year.
Okay. Good comment. Anything else? All right. So, any comments from the public on this before I move on? All right, we'll move now to item 7G. This is our Access Fiber Internet update. Thank you, Mr. Hoagland.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. And audience too. Here, let me get the slideshow up. I'm pleased tonight to provide an update on Access Anacortes Fiber Internet. It seems that the months go by really quickly, and then it's already time to do an update. So, and I share a lot of the same information, but I think that is the trend that I would like you to pay attention to. You will see in the between September and October that there was not a large increase in the number of residents and businesses put into service, but our monthly revenue is $58,350.25 per month. As you look into a little bit more detail in our customer orders, it helps to identify why we do not have as many installs during this time frame. And that is that we're waiting for the West End expansion to be done so that we can begin the installs. Down here, we do have, sorry, that arrow is covered on my screen. We do have 888 customers in service. That's a combination of businesses and residents. And we have 47 partial installs. So we're doing the outside work in the West End in preparation for the service and the fiber to be spliced in order us to put them into service. I'm also really pleased that, as we have built the business plan, we've been very much focused on obtaining at least a 35% market share. And in our current service areas, we have a 41.2% market share. So I'm pleased that we are doing better than we even originally projected that we needed to do, and that does help. This screen, I think, is really important and shows a trend that you can see that our operating cash flow is getting reducing every month, and very pleased with the trend in August. So we are getting very close to being operationally cash flow neutral or positive. That being said, we do understand that our construction expenses, the backbone and the core installations do have additional costs, and that we're going to be continuing to pay those over time. But we are moving forward and having our operating cash flow be very close to our expenses. So a very positive trend. And that's through August 31st of this year. In regard to the West End expansion, we are expecting that late this month that we're going to be able to begin the full installations. Those installations will continue into next year. We already have 678 orders that have been pre-placed, which is a 29.5% market share in the West End. We have broken out the areas into 4 different zones because it's such a big construction area. So we are expecting, and this is in very general purposes, but this area here will be the first area that will be put into service. And we'll be working with those customers to finish that construction. Overall, the project is about 39% complete, and that's the trenching and the vault placement. Once the trenches and the vaulting is put into place, we then go through and pull the fiber through and then do the splicing. I'm very appreciative of the help of the legal department and the work that they've been doing to help us to secure the easements on private streets in the West End, and we are starting those actually in the EDA expansion area as well. I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to the West End neighborhood. This is a large project and undertaking that the community is going through, and I'm very appreciative of just your patience as we've been building out this important infrastructure for the community. This past week, I'm very pleased that the Washington State Broadband Office announced their infrastructure acceleration grants. This is a pocket of $266 million that's going to be for infrastructure grants that's going to be broken into 2 different rounds. It's a very quick turnaround. The first thing that we need to do is submit a pre-application and a readiness survey. They're looking for jobs that we can move and projects that we can move forward with right away. That needs to be turned in next week. They will get back to us by November 8th to let us know whether or not we need to move forward with the full application. If we do, it's an even shorter window for the full application to get that in by November 29th. But we will know before the end of the year if we are successful with that grant or not. We are submitting 1 large project. So this area that maybe you've seen us talk about in terms of different projects, we will submit as 1 project, all the areas that are in orange. We had great confirmation through the Washington State Broadband Office today that as long as the materials, like we can pre-order materials for these projects, and as long as it's only retroactive back till the beginning of March, that it would be eligible for putting forth as part of the grant expenses. So we're going to do our best and put the kind of our best foot forward. We do expect that area that it covers just over 4,000 premises, both businesses and residents. And we think that it would be about $17 million for the design, construction, and installation for those project areas.
Mayor Gear?
Yes, Mr. Walters.
If we obtain that grant, would the work on that area outside the city in any way slow down the work in providing fiber to our customers inside the city?
No, I think that in a project of this size would be broken down into different projects. And I think that we have very clear understanding that our first priority is the work inside the city limits. The other thing that I would indicate is that part of the funding, that there are some different priorities that they're putting toward, and they would like to see a 20% match, brings you kind of to one of the higher priorities for funding. And so we have been very clear that we can do funding inside the city limits, but not outside the city limits. But just with the work that we're doing here, we think that we can make that qualify. So.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Miller.
I think the willingness to do retroactive payments make it pretty appealing. So good luck with getting this one.
Yeah, we have our fingers crossed and our heads down, pulling all the materials together. So. This is just another way to look at that same area, kind of just the different project areas that we have been identifying, the West End, the EDA area, that area east of A Avenue that's backfilling our current service area. As we talked about earlier during the CFP discussion, we have secured a grant for $2.25 million through the EDA. The process for kind of the checking all of the boxes for that federal funding is very complex, and we are methodically working through that. We do want to move forward with the design work of the Guaymas View area. That's the area that's east of A Avenue, going to A Avenue. And that would be part of our 2022 work, both for design construction and installation. Sorry, I have a spelling error there. We are going to be submitting that through the infrastructure acceleration grant application. The South Fidalgo Bay, which is part of our urban growth area, also is going to be submitted as concrete workers. And so it was a little bit more challenging for our contractor to find somebody to be able to come in and do some of that subcontracted work for the concrete panels.
Thank you. All right, any other questions for Ms. Hsu from the audience or the council? Thank you, great report.
Thank you.
All right, we're moving on now to item 7H. It's a contract modification for residential recyclables and residential organic collection. This is up for discussion and possible action.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Hoagland.
Thank you, Mayor. So this, I'll share my screen again, show you the contract mod that we're proposing tonight. So this is an item that started in the Finance Committee. So Waste Management, Council may remember that Waste Management has come to Council on a couple of occasions requesting increases in the residential recycling fees that are being charged. So the basis of that is the recycling market has changed significantly since contract was signed back in 2015. So what the current proposal, what this is about, Waste Management suggested that there were some other things that could be done before just a straight rate increase was adopted. So one of those things was what we're looking at here, and that's the CPI metric that's used each year to adjust the amount of the contract. So what has been used, what's currently used, what's in the contract now is the Seattle CPI, and it's Seattle, Tacoma, Bellevue, I think, is the CPI metric that we are currently using. And what they have requested is that we change that CPI metric from the Seattle CPI to the CPI, it's called Water, Sewer, and Trash CPI. So it changes at a slightly different rate than the CPI, the Seattle CPI, and they suggested that that might be something that council could consider that might help Waste Management in mitigating some of these additional costs. it may make sense to change the contract to go with this metric. So what I have here is looking at the last several years of the CPI adjustment. So these two columns here, so this first column on the left is the year. This all urban CPI is the CPI that's written into the contract now. So in 2016, for example, the CPI adjustment that we incorporated for the contract was 2.21%. That same year, the water sewer trash metric increased 3.13%. And you can see there, usually the water sewer trash metric is a little bit higher. In 2020, it was significantly higher. It was 1.69 on the all urban metric. The water sewer trash is 3.2. This year, 2021, it's a bit of an anomaly. The Seattle CPI is running at over 5.5%. The water sewer trash is running at 3.57%. So looking at the last 6 years, the average is 3.04. While using the Seattle CPI, it's 3.22 using the water sewer trash. But the waste management representative, I think she came to a couple of the finance committee meetings. We had good conversations about what they were looking at, things that they were trying to do to mitigate some of those costs. So this was one of the items that we talked about, and we, in the committee, we thought that perhaps kind of a stepped approach might be reasonable, maybe taking a step to change the CPI. Another thing that they wanted to incorporate was a contamination charge, and that's not part of this mod that we're talking about tonight, but that's something that we could have additional conversations about, that other entities around the county have already implemented a contamination charge, which would, I believe it's $20 or $25 after a couple of warnings. If somebody puts in something not recyclable, what she was really talking about was like a bag of garbage going into a recycling bin that contaminates the bin, and there's a cost to them then getting rid of that. So the customer would essentially get probably 2 warnings, and then the third time that a contamination was included in the recycling, they would get a fee of $20 or $25. When you think about the recycling, the monthly recycling charge being $12, I think it's a significant fee. But they do have, they have cameras mounted in the bins that the stuff gets dumped into. So they would be able to clearly, illustrate and document, and using those warnings, try to educate the customer on the appropriate items to go into recycling. However, that's a conversation for a different time. What we're talking about now, this modification for your consideration, is changing the CPI metric from the all urban to the water sewer trash. So I'd be happy to try and answer questions you might have, or entertain comments that you might have.
I was just curious about, how do they determine the water sewer trash increases? And I understand CPI for salaries, but I was just curious if you could give any insight to that.
Yeah, it's just so this is the it's part of the same website, the BLS website. It's just a different metric, and it's a mystery to me where this data comes from exactly. But they claim that water sewer trash metric more closely follows what their costs in the recycling industry are.
It makes sense to me, and what I really wanted to see what you provided was kind of a historical of the last 7 years, comparing the rate, CPI versus water sewer trash CPI. So, if this is a more accurate way to track increases, I'm fine with it. I'm a little concerned about the other component that sounds like it might be coming down, the contamination at some point. because as we've said before, it's constantly changing what is allowed in recycling and what is not. I mean, if it's a bag of garbage, that's an easy thing to clearly have made a mistake up on. But I know that myself, as much as I try to recycle, probably puts a few things in there that was allowed, 2 years ago, but isn't allowed today. So I would want to have really clear education to have happened before we got to that point. And hopefully we don't. Yeah. The other is our garbage cans are too small, or at least are of a design that the capacity does not function as it should. So that's another discussion to have when we're going to talk about contamination of recycling.
Yeah.
There.
Mr. Walters and Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I want to second Ms. Cleland McGrath's comments there, especially about the size and shape and performance of the garbage bins. That's probably a conversation for another time. I think that the cumulative effect of the water sewer garbage price index versus the general consumer price index is 1.25% over that time period that you showed there, Steve. So it's not very significant. If it does allow waste management to track better the actual costs, and that's assumedly why they're asking for it, then that makes sense to me. I do think it is important for us to keep in mind that they were the only entity that bid on our recycling contract last time. And I assume that we want them to bid again when our contract ends and we need to go out to bid again. So I do think we can work through the issues of a contamination charge, which is also a discussion for another time. But I do think that on some of these very minor issues, we need to show good faith ability to negotiate things that don't matter very much. And actually, I think that in terms of contamination, we ought to be providing some disincentive for just throwing everything in the recycle bin. So I'm okay with this contract amendment. I think it helps grease the skids for a good relationship with waste management going forward.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Miller.
Look, I'm all for not poisoning any kind of relationship with waste management, but as I think we all know, I'm a little bit skeptical when you come to us. We didn't approve their rate increase that they wanted us to do. We have a really good contract with them that's not due to end until 2025. So thank you, Mayor, and those of us who are on council that approved that contract. But I just keep, how does this benefit the users, the ratepayers? And I'm just not seeing it, especially since you can't explain. I mean, Mr. Hoagland, you said it yourself that you don't understand what this inflator comes from. So why would I jump on supporting that when I don't know what this inflator means? Yeah, you can say it's not a rate increase, but we're changing the inflator, and there's a reason that the inflator's being changed, and I don't understand it. So I would have a hard time voting for the contract change. And I know everybody said, hey, we're not going to talk about contamination charges, but everybody talked about it. So I'm going to talk about contamination charges also. I would love to have that discussion, but I'd also love to set up a system where they're warning us now. And I think that could benefit waste management in the future if we do decide to do a contamination charge, that they should be sending us warnings right now, or our customers warnings right now saying, hey, you contaminated it, and we should be tracking that, and that will help in the future. So yeah, I'm having a hard time with this one.
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Young.
I think I hear the point, and I'm thankful that Mr. Walters reminded us that we're hoping to continue to facilitate a great relationship. Where I struggle in this process is that within any of the work that we're choosing to do, any of the contract modifications, any of the other reductions in service and minor decreases in cost, still when you add it all up, still ends up being rate increases. When we first began this conversation, at least with me on council, the stock price of waste management was roughly around $90 a share. Currently, today it's $154 a share. And so, you know, and I look at, because I watch the market every morning, I look at the profits of this industry and it's doing extraordinarily well. I know that doesn't necessarily negate cost associated with generating that, but when we spoke to the representative that came before council, she indicated, if I'm correct, that 90% of the products that used to be accepted by China that were no longer being accepted have found other methods to be accepted and being purchased. So the cumulative net effect has not been as disastrous for waste management. Now, with that said, I understand that every industry wants to increase profits and move forward. I support that. I think waste management does a reasonable job. They really do. The question really is if we're going to think about, and I know this is a future discussion, a contamination charge, and as Mr. Miller indicated, if the cameras are already in there now, why not begin the process of helping to educate our public? Because that was one of the things that I asked of the representative. So my point is, what we are really in effect doing is still giving that rate increase when we signed the contract. And I think we've had several rate increases all along. So I also struggle with the rationale simply because we only have one person bidding on the contract. I get that. But at the end of the day, what we're really doing is reevaluating, litigating or negotiating a contract with Waste Management because they're continuing to ask for more. Even if we decided that we were going to rinse out some of the products that we were putting in the recycle bin, we're choosing as a city to either have Waste Management send it to the dump or we as individuals send it to the dump. The problem is it's still going to the dump. And so if they're going to use the water to wash it out and because it's contaminated, then what they're really asking is for us to do that. So I also struggle, like Mr. Miller, on the business model ask of us as a city. So, you know, I struggle a little bit, like Ms. Cleland McGrath mentioned about the different rates that we're using, whether it's the WST or the urban rate. Those are just fluctuations in who can give us the most money. I'm struggling with this whole idea, and I'm willing to move forward, but I fully expect the Waste Management to come with another adjustment next year, as they always have done. And in effect, what they're really doing are raising our rates. Profits are up extraordinarily well, and I applaud them for that.
Mr. Hoagland, if we don't take, if the council doesn't go for this, where are we at with them?
Well, we have an existing contract that works. This is a modification that they're requesting. So we would continue to operate under the CPI all urban users metric, which the dates that are written into the contract drive the CPI reference point have already been determined. So that's at 5.52%. That'll go into effect January 1. If you make this change, it would be 3.57%. But as I mentioned, it's kind of an anomaly. Generally, the WST is a little bit higher than the CPI.
So we'd have a 1-year reduction, but then the following year it could go up again.
Yes, there's the CPI metric it changes every year. Right. So the language doesn't allow it to go down, but if the CPI goes up, then the rate will go up. Okay. Very, very similar to the way our utility rates are structured.
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Miller.
It goes back to my original question of what is the benefit to the end user, and I think it would help at least some of us on council if we would just say, you know, we're paying $11.74 now, something like that, with the CPI inflator that we're using now. Next year, we can expect to pay, sorry, I can't do that math in my head right now, but something more than that. And if we use this other urban inflator, we're going to pay this amount. So those are the kind of details I think we should have in order to make the decision, because yeah, we might benefit for a year and that might be worth it because we know Waste Management's going to come see us again in a little while. But I think we're missing a big piece of information to include understanding what that other inflator means.
Steve, could you bring that back next week to us?
Well, this is,
Mayor,
Go ahead,
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Walters.
We can't accurately predict inflation. If we could, we probably shouldn't be spending our time at city council meetings. I think that the issue is that the urban consumer price index inflator is a basket of goods selected by economists, and they track the prices of those goods over time and then reduce it to a single number. The water sewer garbage inflator only is tracking water sewer garbage expenses. And the point there is that it's more fair for waste management. And I'm not very excited to be in the position of defending fairness for waste management. I just think that if you look at the figures that Mr. Hoagland put on display, there were a couple of years where the water sewer garbage inflator was higher than the regular CPI, which we're using now. There were a couple of years, including this year, where the CPI was higher. And it shakes out to, over that time period, to within 1% cumulatively. And if using a more fair number helps waste management manage their expenses, then that makes sense to me simply as a matter of fairness. It is not unusual if you have a big contract with a contractor and some giant anomaly occurs, whether they run into something unexpected in the ground or whatever, that we might have to renegotiate the contract. And so that certainly has happened here with waste management with the change in China's acceptance of recyclables. And yes, recyclables are still getting recycled now here in the United States, but the costs of doing that here in the US are different. So I think that overall, this doesn't make a whole lot of difference because again, it boils down to just like 1%. But if we end up again with only one bidder on recycling in 3 years, we are really going to be, I think, in a world of hurt when they propose rates that are out of this world and amount to a lot more than just the 1% being proposed here.
Mayor Gear?
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Young, then Mr. Miller.
You know, Mr. Walters, you make a very good point, and I really am not disagreeing with you, and I'm glad you're bringing forward the argument that you are, because what it really does is it really gives pause to what actions we may be taking. The thing I struggle with, though, and I'm hoping we can find a solution for, is there are no guarantees from Waste Management that when they come to the table, should they be the only bidder on a project, that this project, they will give us favorable rates. It's just not there. I think we're hoping that they do, and or maybe there's somebody else that may come forward and bid on this project. But, you know, the truth is Waste Management has come to us, if I'm correct, almost every year I've been on council and asking for changes. And each of those changes have resulted in effect, a rate increase of some sort or a rate reduction or a reduction in service, but at that same price or a minor reduction, which the equivalent is still a raise. So, you know, I struggle with that. I just want, if Waste Management really wants to be a good partner, and I hope they do, that we should be able to build in some type of understanding and future cost ability to negotiate that. Right now, all we're doing is giving out party favors, and we haven't even decided if there's going to be a party. Thank you.
Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out the you actually do predictive, every CPI inflator is for predictive rates. That's how COLAs are done. That's how the federal government, you do your CPI, I don't know what date in October or November, but that sets the rates for the next year. So just want to make sure that's clear that you do make predictive analysis of what the inflation is going to be for the following year. So we could get that information about what we think the cost of our totes will be for next year.
Okay, great
Mayor Gear.
discussion. Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Who knew this was going to be so exciting to talk about? I mean, I think they chose a good time when CPI is in theory going to be 5.5% increase to say, hey, let's switch over to this other option that's not quite as painful to see. I guess what I would have liked or would like, I'm not necessarily saying I need to wait another week, but I would like to have a better understanding of the water, sewer, garbage CPI. And I assume it's determined, as Mr. Walter said, based on, the going rates, and it's a long, involved process by private companies with the state and a lot of, time spent. But I'm curious if there's a reason to switch over because they're projecting the cost of recycling to go up significantly in the next, 4, 8, 12 years. And that's why there is this shift to switch over. I think that if it's a more accurate representation of the cost of doing this type of business, then it's reasonable that we are paying for the cost of our recycling, right? But I guess whenever you get a new number or a new kind of indicator and we're committing to it, I wish we had a little bit better understanding of how that number is generated. Because right now, yeah, it looks better than the option. Correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm reading the agreement, there is the ability to increase or decrease based on the consumer price index for water, sewer, trash. Not that will ever go down, but that is a mechanism that doesn't exist with our current CPI. And I think that's accurate. Is that accurate, Mr. Hoagland?
I'm sorry, I'll need to double check that. I thought there was I thought it prevented it from going negative.
Oh, then I might be reading it wrong. I'm sorry.
I'll double check that for you.
Yeah, and then the last thing is I'm turning myself in. In the last 5 years, we have gotten received the note saying that we have put inappropriate things in our recycling. So it does happen. You guys must do a better job of filtering out your recycling than some of the rest of us do. But in certain cases, you will get a note on your recycling bin. So they are doing it at least somewhat.
And I will say that for businesses, they already charge a contamination fee. I happen to know a restaurant that's happened to. So they do it right now today, not for the people we have contracts with, not for our customers, but in this town, if you're a business and you contaminate, you will get a bill, and I think it's more like $80. It's a pretty swift slap on the hand. So it's already happening. So anyway, not that that's germane to this, but so I don't know, what is your pleasure, council? Do you want to think about it a week? Do you want to take action? Mr. Young?
Just really, and if we decide to think about it a week and come back, I totally understand all of the views. I really do. I just happen to be passionate about a model that allows for everybody has the profit, because we would not be in business if we weren't trying to generate a profit. I understand that. But in the ways that we're looking at this, to steadily increase charges when we already have a contract. I think if Mr. Hoagland, if you were to come back, if we were to decide as council to come back next week, what I would love to see is the projected consumer price index. I looked that up while we were online to see what the trends were. I would love to see those comparisons between the two, because I think that right now, if we can get those comparisons, we will look at this, I think, a bit differently and have additional input in order to make a decision about it. I really do. And yeah, and we want to be a good partner, but we also want to keep it very real.
Okay. So next week, you want to talk about it next week?
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Walters.
I would invite Waste Management to make their case, because I sure don't want to make their case for them. I just want us to be thinking of the future and the potential for a much, much more significant rate increase if we can't figure out how to do recycling in the next 3 years. But with any contract mod like this, I think the contractor seeking the discretionary modification should make their case.
Okay. I think we've got our marching orders. We're going to bring this back. Any other discussion? Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? At this time, I will adjourn the City Council meeting. Thank you all for attending. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.